It's the year 198X. In a dimly lit cell, a single bulb casts an eerie glow above the prisoner's head. Chains bind his hands, turning his battered body as he bears the painful aftermath of relentless torture. Even his feet are tightly bound, rendering him powerless. A persistent fly, feasting on his blood, crawls across his face. Yet he remains remarkably composed despite his mounting irritation. After enduring extensive interrogation and suffering, the prisoner finally speaks his first word, food. The head officer is taken aback by this unexpected request. One of the interrogators remarks that the South Korean army doesn't cater to spies, but the prisoner pleads for sustenance, willing to confess everything if they provide him with a meal as he's starving. The head officer inquires if he is serious, and the prisoner confirms his willingness. A deal is struck, food in exchange for information about his objectives and infiltration route. The prisoner explains that he joined the army in pursuit of survival, but his current predicament threatens to leave him starving to death. The head officer instructs a subordinate to fetch food from the kitchen. The subordinate hesitates, but is met with the head officer's anger, prompting him to comply. The head officer emphasizes the urgency of extracting information, warning that their superiors will claim credit if they fail. The prisoner is released from his restraints and served a meal. With his hands still chained, he uses the spoon to taste the soup, remarking that it lacks flavor. He proceeds to pick up a pair of chopsticks, noting that military food consistently falls short in taste. A subordinate insists that taste is irrelevant. They need information. Suddenly, the prisoner transforms the chopstick into a deadly weapon, swiftly impaling the head officer. Initially confused, the head officer collapses, dead. The soldiers are stunned by the swift and inconspicuous turn of events. The prisoner emphasizes the importance of food's taste as he holds the remaining chopstick. The torturers rush to attack him, but he skillfully dispatches them all with a single chopstick. He introduces himself as Do Jongen, a senior intelligence sergeant, revealing his infiltration route as swimming through the ocean. His ultimate goal was to eliminate them, just as he did. Spotting the fly that had been irritating him earlier, he takes aim with the chopstick and swiftly dispatches it. Sometime later, Do Jongen finds himself in Seoul City, seated with Lieutenant Colonel Park in a small restaurant. The sergeant informs him that nobody in their unit is quite like him. Why does he contemplate leaving? Jongen responds that the military grub has lost its flavor, but it sure looks appetizing here. The sergeant grins and tosses the meat chunks into the broth, handing the rest to Jongen. Jongen selects a piece with his chopsticks and mentions he doesn't eat like Park. He takes small scoops of rice, adding it to the soup gradually to savor the meal without making the leftover rice soggy. As he eats, Park inquires if he's considering leaving because of that mission. Jongen questions why Park is asking, as he just returned from completing the recent assignment. Park explains that Jongen knows precisely which mission he's referring to, and emphasizes that the plan was to return alive, and he didn't fail when he came back alone. Jongen clarifies it's not about that mission. After a brief pause, he expresses gratitude to Park for supporting him and helping him make a living. Park assures him he did everything right, and hopes Jongen's talents will be recognized even after he departs. 1 year later, at a construction site, two co-workers comment on Jongen's efficiency in carrying heavy loads and digging. During the lunch break, Jongen heads to the bank. There, he notices a girl at the counter assisting an elderly woman. She glances his way and he waves at her with a smile. It all began a year ago when he joined the construction company. When he received his first paycheck, the owner advised him to save for the future, knowing it would help him achieve his goals. However, at the time, he wasn't sure what those goals were. Nevertheless, he visited the nearest bank during his lunch breaks and opened an account. On that day, he saw Siona for the first time and fell in love with her instantly. Since then, he started visiting the bank daily during lunch to catch a glimpse of her. He learned she came from a low-income family and started working there right after high school. She inquired if he hadn't saved any money during his military service. He explained that he had saved money but had given it to the families of fallen soldiers. Now he's working hard again to save more money. Today he's back to deposit some money into his savings account. She suggests he deposits money monthly to avoid the hassle, but he insists it's fine this way because he gets to see her every day. This became his reason to live well, but still, he struggles to live well. He listens to the news on TV while lying on the sofa at home. He reflects on his past and the time he matured, diligently training in various popular skills and completing challenging missions. Suddenly, a knock sounds at his door. He inquires about the visitor's identity. The individual asks if he's First Sergeant Du. Cracking the door open slightly, he presses for more information. The person introduces themselves as Jo Tae-moon, a former colleague. Jong-gon is surprised to see Tae-moon impeccably dressed and sporting an expensive watch. He questions how Tae-moon managed to locate him. Tae-moon explains he scoured everywhere until he finally tracked him down. Tae-moon informs Jongen of a job opportunity. Curious, Jangin inquires about the nature of the job. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. What's your favorite school-related manhwa? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now, back to the recap. Taemoon clarifies that it's something he excels at, but reassures him it doesn't involve harm to anyone. Instead, he needs Jongin to impart a valuable lesson to someone. Jongin grows serious and asks for complete honesty regarding the task. Taemoon confesses to being a successful entrepreneur in the public eye, but reveals his true identity as the leader of a gang. The person he wants Jangin to deal with is the head of another group. Jangin firmly states that he left his military career to avoid such activities. Taemoon questions Jonggon's decision and asks if he left the army to live a life like this, doing construction work in such a place. Jonggon advises him to be cautious with his words. Taemoon entices him with a tempting offer of 50 million won, suggesting it could help him secure a better home or start a business for a brighter future. Jangin considers that he wouldn't be able to save that much, even after 10 years of construction work. Taemoon hands him his business card and encourages him to visit if he changes his mind. Before departing, he remarks on the peculiarity of someone like Jangin, avoiding the very work he excels at. Jongin places the card on the side table. As he lies on the floor, he contemplates his presence here and decides to persist a little longer, to see if he truly can't resist returning to his skill. Lost in thought, he eventually falls asleep. The following day at the construction site, numerous stacks of cement bags await him. His boss instructs him to move all the bags where they're needed. Jongin questions the whereabouts of his fellow workers. The boss explains that he only called him because he'd seen him handle heavy loads the other day and believed he could manage this task alone. Jangin gazes at his boss's cheerful expression, wondering if he's serious. Meanwhile, Shiona and her co-worker enjoy tea while standing outside the bank. She gazes up at the sky and wonders how he will manage today. Her co-worker inquires why she's pondering this. Her face always brightens up at lunchtime. Shiona asks what she's referring to. Her co-worker explains that she's kind to Jangin. It appears she's interested in him. Shiona suggests he'll save money during lunch break. If this were a shop, he'd be a regular customer, so she should treat him well. Her co-worker agrees, saying Jangin might be more attractive and wealthy. This remark makes Shiona uneasy. She smiles and mentions he might not be handsome, but has a strong physique. Her co-worker responds that he works at a construction site, lifting bricks and heavy loads all day. Shiona says her father worked at a construction site, but never had a body like his. She leans in and thinks she should mind her own business and stay out of hers. She warns her that she knows about her affair with that condescending manager. While sitting at her desk, she wonders why she got upset earlier talking about Jongin. Suddenly, he enters the bank and waves at her. She asks why he's there before lunch break. He explains that he'll be busy later and came a bit early. She asks if he's there to deposit money. He says he just came to see her because he's going somewhere. She tries to grasp what he means. He waves goodbye and mentions he'll deposit a significant amount when he returns. Her cheeks turn red, thinking he came just to see her. He grabs a ticket to Daesan and boards a bus to meet Taemoon. While on the bus, he looks at a business card, thinking things might improve if he goes through with it. Taemoon and his driver are already waiting when he arrives in Daesan. In the car, Taemoon shows a photo of their target, Park Gwanho. He explains they're both vying for control of the tourist hotel's slot machines. According to the rules, he can't confront Park directly, or he'll lose the rights. But if an outsider, unrelated to their feud, suddenly steps in, things can proceed smoothly, and he can secure those rights. He cautions Jangin that it won't be easy, as Park expects him and has strong security. He suggests waiting until Park lowers his guard. Janggon asks for the time. Taemoon is startled by the question. It says it's past 12:30. Janggon notes that there's plenty of time until 4:30 p.m., as the banks are now closed. He requests his assistants to escort him to the park for a quick favor. Afterward, Taemoon can deposit funds into his bank account before the banks shut down. Taemoon expresses concern that going now may lead to a confrontation with the park's security personnel. Jangin believes it shouldn't be a problem. Taemoon accompanies him to the hotel, where Park and his associates are having lunch. He also cautions him about Park's ever-present special guard. That individual used to be a wrestler. Jonggon inquires about the restaurant's best dish. The driver informs him that the signature dish here is their fried dumplings. Jonggon mentions he'll return shortly and exits the vehicle. Park is enjoying his meal with his underlings nearby. Jangin sits alone in a corner with a plate of fried dumplings in front of him. He mixes soy sauce and vinegar in equal parts in a bowl and adds powdered red pepper. He dips the dumplings and savors the flavor. After finishing his meal and giving thanks, he hurls the glass toward Park, shattering it against the wall. A rotund man questions his actions Jangin explains that he's provoking a fight due to his boss's noisy eating. Park looks at him strangely and orders his men to confront him. They charge toward Jangin, resulting in a scene of scattered food, broken furniture, and injured men strewn across the floor. Jangin remains standing, hands in his pockets, while Park leans against the damaged wall. Park asks who Jangin is, puzzled that he wasn't aware of someone as powerful as him in their field. Jangin responds, suggesting Park might remember him as an outsider with anger management issues. He smirks, blood trickling from his nose, and asks who sent him. Park offers to double his payment if he collaborates with him. Jangin contemplates whether this man has enough money to pay him twice the agreed-upon amount. Park understands that he's being compensated generously. He says it doesn't matter because Jangin interrupts, asking him why he stopped talking. Suddenly, he senses someone behind him, the rotund man holding a weapon ready to strike. Jangin defends himself with his arms when the man attacks, feeling a sharp pain as if something inside him has broken. He retaliates with a quick kick between the man's legs, causing him to fall in agony and lose consciousness. Tears stream down Jangin's face from the pain. Jangin looks at Park and asks if it's already 4:30 p.m. Park checks his watch and informs him that it's not even 2 p.m. Jangin says it's perfect and walks away. Jangin and Taemoon exit the bank after depositing money into Jangin's account. Taemoon expresses surprise that they made it before the bank's closing time. He inquires about Jangin's plans for the money. Jangin replies that he's uncertain but noticed some apartments near the bus terminal in the morning and might consider buying one. Taemoon suggests looking for an apartment in a better neighborhood in the middle of Seoul. Jangin considers trying his hand at stocks, as many people do these days. Taemoon asks if he has a specific store in mind. He suggests that going to Han Electronics is a good idea, because a company responsible for providing electricity to the entire nation is unlikely to go bankrupt. Jangin suggests Sam Electronics, citing the intelligence of the new company chairman. Suddenly, a sharp pain strikes him, feeling like an electric shock. He requests a hospital visit due to the pain where he was hit. Taemoon mentions they can go to the hospital he frequents. Jangin inquires about the frequency. He responds that there's an experienced doctor who isn't surprised when he shows up after injuries. Both arms are casted, leaving him puzzled. The doctor informs him that his arms are fractured. The fractures will take a month to heal. Jangin asks in surprise if he has to endure this for a whole month. The doctor advises him against using his arms to avoid delaying the healing process. Jangin isn't pleased with his predicament. Taemoon teases him, suggesting that someone will face difficulties from now on. They head to a bar and have a drink. Jangin feels good, but questions whether he can drink in this condition. Taemoon asks if he's forgotten their method of using alcohol for healing wounds. Jangin chuckles, mentioning it's been a while since he heard that line. They continue drinking and reminiscing about their army days when they worked together. Taemoon expresses how he always knew Jangin was strong, but didn't anticipate him defeating so many people so quickly, especially in a bare-handed fight. He also admits to having prepared weapons just in case. Jangin inquires about how he obtained the weapons. While pouring more whiskey, Taemoon casually mentions that shotguns are easy to find, but he smuggles pistols from Russia. Jangin remarks that he's found a fitting job, to which Taemoon replies that the army suited him better. He asks why Jangin left his previous job in the special forces. He turns melancholic and mentions that he and 3 colleagues took part in a mission, but he's the only survivor. Taemoon is taken aback. Jangin confesses he felt he couldn't continue the job and resigned. He expected to encounter them in his dreams, but they never appeared. Maybe they harbor deep resentment toward him. Taemoon suggests they have another drink. They both glance at the empty bottles and realize they've had quite a bit to drink. Jangin stands up and says he's leaving. Taemoon inquires about how he plans to get home now. Jangin replies that he'll take the bus because he wants to sleep in a bed. Taemoon thinks about booking a hotel room for him for the night, but Jangin leaves anyway. As he walks along the sidewalk, he feels overly full and decides to sit on a bench. Due to his excessive drinking, he falls asleep on the bench. A van from a homeless assistance center drives by and stops when they see him lying there. Some workers notice the intoxicated man with both arms injured and decide to bring him in for assistance. They transport him to the Daesan Welfare Society. Jangin experiences a dream. He finds himself in a dark field and someone is calling his name from behind. He turns around abruptly and spots 2 men in uniforms, both wearing identical pendants. He recognizes them as his fellow juniors from that mission. Suddenly, he notices a gun on the ground near his feet. He picks it up, places it against his head, and says he'll do it if that's what they want. Abruptly, he awakens from his dream, startled by a man clapping near his head to wake him up. Jangin sits up, but his arms still ache. He asks the man who he is and where he is. The man introduces himself as Lee Sunjo and explains that they are at a Daesan welfare facility and Jangun is wearing inmates' clothing. As Sunjo explains all this, Jangun stands up and heads towards the door. Sunjo asks him where he's going. Jangun halts by the locked door, wondering why it's locked from the inside. Sunjo begins to explain, revealing that this place is where people are forcibly detained. Jangun is shocked and asks for clarification. Someone calls out to them from behind and questions why they're standing there. Sunjo warns Jangun that the person is their platoon leader and has a volatile temper, so he should not provoke him. However, Jangun notices the keys attached to the leader's arm and asks him for the door keys. The leader glares at him angrily. In response, Jangun kicks the leader's leg, causing him to yelp in pain. He considers punching the leader's face, but recalls the doctor's advice not to use his injured arm, so he refrains. Two of the leader's subordinates request permission to teach Jangun a lesson. The leader orders them to take him to the ward. One of them steps forward to confront Jangun. He contemplates fighting them despite his injured arms, but he remembers Sunjo's warning about the forced imprisonment and the importance of healing his arms to escape. However, he also realizes that his injuries could worsen if he gets hit accidentally, so he faces a dilemma. Simultaneously, Sunjo steps forward and explains to the group that Jangun is new and doesn't know where he is. He suggests giving him a chance and promises to educate him properly. That individual wants Jangun to request forgiveness. Sunju urges him to apologize and admit it was his fault. Jangun, still shocked, lowers his head and apologizes, but the person strikes his head and demands better behavior from him. Then he instructs everyone to prepare for roll call. While seated in a line, Sunju commends Jangun and promises to explain things later. Jangun notices him counting the people and mentions there are 24, including the newcomer. After unlocking the door as they leave, Jangun inquires about their destination. Sunju responds that they are heading for breakfast. Upon hearing the breakfast name, Jangun becomes pleased. He observes the surroundings and notes that it resembles a military facility. Although it's not exactly a prison, yet it confines people. What perplexes him most is their reference to it as breakfast. He contemplates using a chopstick to confront the person in charge, but they only provide spoons for eating. While eating, Sunju explains that this place is where they bring in and guide homeless individuals. Jangun protests, stating he isn't homeless. Sunju clarifies that nobody there is genuinely homeless. This place is where anyone, regardless of their status, is captured and compelled to work. The country provides funding for every homeless person brought here, and welfare agencies imprison people to access that money. Jangun is stunned by this revelation and asks who would subject humans to such treatment. Suddenly, two well-dressed men enter the room. Sunju informs him that these individuals are responsible for these actions. The director's sons. The bespectacled one is Park Gwang, the vice president, while the taller one is Park Yom, the general manager. Jangun suspects they are conducting an inspection. Gwang inquires about the injuries on Jangun's arms. Sunju identifies Jangun as the new inmate who arrived the previous night. Gwang questions whether Jangun can survive on welfare in this manner, to which Sunju assures that he will take good care of him and teach him everything. Gwang appreciates Sunju's efforts and suggests that he aims to be an honor student. Gwang implies that he will remember Sunju's name for future opportunities. Jangun now grasps Sunju's true motives for being so kind to him. Gwang asks Jangun about the food's taste, to which he honestly responds that the food is terrible. Gwang asks him to repeat himself, and Sunju grows concerned because Jangun is acting out again. Jangun reiterates that the food isn't fit for humans, as everything in it is spoiled. Gwang lifts the tray and pours it over Jangun's head, berating him for complaining about the food and smashing the tray on his head. Blood rushes into Jangun's eyes with anger, but his fractured arms keep him from taking any action. Gwang scolds Sunju, urging him to prevent any more reckless behavior from Jangun. After they depart, Sunju checks in on Jangun's well-being. Jangun, still reeling from the humiliation at breakfast, struggles to clean himself due to his injured arms. Later, he and Sunju engage in their assigned task of sweeping the grounds. Jangun complains about his clothes not drying properly, fueled by his lingering anger towards Gwang. Sunju reassures him that the clothes will dry quickly in the sun, prompting Jangun to express relief that Gwang confronted him before bath time, sparing him a prolonged wait. Jangun questions the ethics of mistreating people, finding an unlikely ally in an elderly bald inmate who concurs with the newcomer's sentiments. Intriguingly, the old man's manner of speech is peculiar. Sunju addresses him as Your Excellency and inquires about his presence. Confused, Jangun wonders if the man believes himself to be the president. Another man approaches, referring to the old man as His Excellence and questioning why he is outside. Jangun seeks an explanation for these unusual references and the presidential demeanor. Sunju clarifies that the man is not impersonating the president but genuinely believes he is the president. his mind scarred by experiences from the Vietnam War. The bald head serves as a haunting reminder of the president, causing him distress. Jong-gun sympathizes with the man's unfortunate plight and inquires about Sunju's knowledge. Sunju reveals that the older adult's friend who shared these insights also suffered and eventually succumbed to illness. Jong-gun is shocked, questioning if the friend passed away within the facility. Sunju grimly acknowledges that many meet their end here, whether due to injuries, illness, or abuse from staff or the platoon leader. He mentions the platoon leader's earlier threat to send Jang-in to the ward, a place where individuals are left to die without treatment. Expressing his disdain for these individuals as bad guys, Jang-in's thoughts are interrupted when the platoon leader calls for everyone to gather at the sports field. Sunju informs him that today is an inquiry day, and they are about to witness the worst among the bad guys. All the inmates obediently line up, ready to listen to the facility's director. His name, a melodious echo through the gathering, resonates as Park In-jae, a figure of undeniable authority. All heads bow in reverence as In-jae steps forward, ready to impart his wisdom. He addresses the diverse array of trees that grace our world, each with its unique purpose, drawing a parallel to humanity's multifaceted existence. He emphasizes the significance of perspective, character, and untapped potential in defining an individual's worth. Yet the individuals standing before him are deemed unworthy, stripped of any redeeming qualities. In-jae unflinchingly labels them as twisted and unattractive trees. In an unexpected twist, he likens his role to that of Jesus, assuming the mantle of a carpenter, dedicated to pruning and trimming these seemingly useless trees, sculpting them to discover their hidden value. A reluctant applause follows, coerced from the audience, but not everyone in the room shares the sentiment. Jang-in, while feigning attentiveness, finds himself distracted, and his focus drifts towards the facility's layout. He observes that it's nestled into the mountainside, with most of its perimeter secured by imposing walls. The exception is a sheer cliff, where the mountain was cleaved to create an opening. A single imposing gate serves as the lone means of entry or exit, guarded by vigilant sentinels ready to thwart any escape attempt. Jang-gun acknowledges the inherent difficulty of breaking free with the current circumstances and weaponry at their disposal. As In-jae concludes his address, he embraces his sons and expresses gratitude for their dedication to this establishment. The stage is then taken by Gwang, who eagerly unveils the identity of the distinguished inmate selected as the honor student, igniting excitement and hope among the residents. Sunju, in particular, holds aspirations of being the chosen one, prompting Jong-gun to inquire about the honor student's significance. He learns that this coveted title signifies the person chosen to be released from the welfare facility. Amidst a hushed crowd, Gwang reveals that Kwak Do-young has been chosen as the fortunate soul this time. Do-young steps forward to express his heartfelt appreciation, overjoyed at the prospect of returning home. He is subsequently escorted to the staff office, where queries about his departure date linger in his mind. Gwang assures him that a final health check by the doctor is a necessary formality before departure. Shortly thereafter, the doctor conducts a thorough examination, pronouncing Do-young fit for life beyond these walls, administering an injection billed as a vital nutrient for his continued well-being. In a peculiar twist, Do-young succumbs to unconsciousness, prompting two attendants to transfer him outside at Gwang's behest. The suggestion arises to strip him of his newcomer's attire, a practical measure to save costs. The doctor, however, finds this proposal astonishing, admonishing the focus on thriftiness in such dire circumstances. Gwang, with an air of authority, counters that he's not one to squander his resources like the doctor, who gambled away his wealth and now toils under Gwang's command. The doctor receives a stern warning to know his place if he desires self-preservation. Meanwhile, Do-young awakens in an operating theater room, disoriented about his surroundings. The doctor reassures him that they are conducting an examination and urges him not to be afraid. Do-young, however, reacts with a punch to the doctor's face and makes a daring escape. The commotion attracts the attention of the general manager, who administers his own brand of punishment, forcibly escorting Do-young to the operating theater and sealing the door. Meanwhile, Tae-moon and his informant sit discreetly in the corner of a dimly lit restaurant, engaged in secretive deliberations. In the dimly lit room, a mysterious figure leaned in closer to Tae-moon, bearing news that would send ripples through their underworld organization. Guan-ho and his loyal henchmen, the backbone of their operation, were currently confined to hospital beds, rendering their criminal empire temporarily paralyzed. The informant whispered this unsettling revelation to Tae-moon, who couldn't help but let out a nervous chuckle, placing his half-finished bowl of food on the table. "Looks like Congressman Choi's office decided to grant us an unexpected gift," Taemoon remarked with a sly grin, his laughter growing louder as he contemplated the sudden turn of events. But there was something unsettling about this swift turn of fortune. The informant leaned in even closer, his voice hushed as he shared a disconcerting detail. "Taemoon, somehow Choi's office seems to know everything already. They've made their decision within a single day." Taemoon, never one to underestimate his political adversaries, nodded in agreement. Choi is indeed a clever old fox. His wit and rapid decision-making have earned him a seat in the parliament. The informant, now emboldened by the news, proposed a celebratory gesture. "Perhaps, if you don't mind, you could be the one to cut the ribbon and mark the grand opening of the slot machine business," he suggested. As they savored their fried dumplings, Taemoon's mind drifted to a different place and time. He remembered a moment when Jongin, a trusted associate, had inquired about the specialty of the restaurant they were dining in. Taemoon smiled, acknowledging the thought, and spoke warmly. "These fried dumplings are truly exceptional." However, concern crept into his thoughts as he wondered whether Jongin had returned home safely, especially considering his recent arm injury. Meanwhile, in another location, Jongin found himself engaged in a rather mundane task, capping shower bottles at the welfare facility. His colleague Sunju had yet to inquire about his name, prompting Jangin to introduce himself. "I'm Jangin," he replied succinctly. Curiosity piqued, Sunju probed further. "What kind of work did you used to do outside?" Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out Theonikil being 9317 who commented, "I am confused. Why would people died on their native world can go back original world after being sent to another world? Sound like recipe for chaos. Seem like to me the divine beings are either very reckless or don't give a crap, which explains a lot on our hero. Has returned video, really good commentary there. You prove a lot of great points." Jangin reflected for a moment, his mind going back to the fateful day when an altercation led to his arm injury. "I used to take on physical labor," he admitted. The platoon commander, suddenly appearing on the scene, interrupted their conversation, clearly displeased with their idle chatter during work hours. Sunju quickly offered apologies, fearing the commander's wrath. The platoon commander then turned his attention to Jangin, asking a question that ignited a spark of frustration within Jongin. "What did you do in front of the vice president?" he demanded. Before Jangin could respond, the commander swiftly changed tack, instructing him to forget the question and to be more cautious in the future. Jangin remained silent, prompting the commander to resort to more forceful methods. A sharp blow to the head left Jangin with no choice but to answer in the affirmative. As he glanced at the keys dangling from his injured arms, Jangin couldn't help but ask Sunju about the peculiar way the barracks doors were locked from the inside. It seemed counterintuitive, especially for a place meant to provide shelter and security. Sunju explained that, long ago, during an inspection, someone had deemed it inappropriate to lock the doors from the outside, as it resembled a prison. Since then, the doors had been locked from within, creating an unconventional security measure. He adds with a tone of revelation that the selection of commanders in their current predicament was rather unconventional. These individuals held no authority beyond the confines of their newfound roles. Consequently, they became consumed by the intoxicating allure of their newfound power, showing little regard for the fact that they were essentially detainees. Jongin, now fully comprehending the entire situation, exchanges a few words with Sunju. In the midst of their conversation, Sunju confesses to feeling a tinge of envy, contemplating how the person they're discussing has likely already returned home, while they remain stuck in their present predicament. In a moment fraught with tension, the doctor solemnly passes the organ box to the general manager, urging him to maintain absolute silence regarding the earlier incident when dealing with the vice president. However, things take a sudden, violent turn as the aforementioned individual fixes a steely gaze upon the doctor, launching a swift and forceful kick into his abdomen. With a stern tone, he instructs the doctor to summon the vice president and implores him to acknowledge his own errors and engage in introspection. Before departing, he nonchalantly tosses an envelope filled with money onto the ground in front of the doctor, leaving him in a daze. All feelings of pain and guilt momentarily evaporate as the doctor's eyes fixate on the envelope, his thoughts drifting toward the successful gambling venture he may partake in later. With the box now in the possession of the smugglers, they compensate the general manager with a generous sum. He promptly returns to his father, handing over the entirety of the earned money. Injae, his father, applauds his efforts and advises him to rest, understanding the likely difficulties involved in transporting the box. Afterward, the general manager secures the newfound wealth in a wallet brimming with cash, carefully locking it away. As the night falls, everyone settles down, Preparing to rise early the following morning, as Jongin arranges his sleeping area, he reflects on the 4 days he has spent in this environment. Drawing from the resilience forged during his intensive training in his prior career, he's managed to adapt to this challenging new life. One aspect, however, continues to baffle him: the quality of the food. Nevertheless, with his arms still on the mend, he resigns himself to this situation, mentally positioning it as an operation for survival. Intriguingly, he considers that just a few days ago, he faced life-threatening missions with unwavering fearlessness. Now, he's consumed by a singular worry: the inability to see Shiona during lunch breaks. The nagging thought of her possibly forgetting him begins to weigh heavily on his mind. Meanwhile, Shiona also gazes longingly at the door, anticipating his return. Her concerned colleague encourages her to join them for lunch, but her thoughts are fixated on why he hasn't appeared in several days. When he departed, he promised to return with money, leaving her hoping for his well-being and fearing he may have encountered an accident. The platoon leader, growing impatient with Jongin's slow pace of work, resorts to a slap. However, an older man intervenes, vowing to make up for the delay but refusing to inflict harm, considering Jongin's injuries. This act of compassion incurs the wrath of the platoon commander, who accuses the older man of playing favorites and questions his sanity. In a fit of rage, the platoon commander strikes the older man, prompting Jongin's fury to simmer. Unable to bear the older man's pain, Jongin rises, calling out the platoon leader in a fit of anger. The room falls silent in response to his audacity. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps. The platoon leader whirls around, demanding to know if Jongin has lost his mind. Jongin maintains his composure, refraining from answering. Two subordinate platoon leaders glare at him, their anger palpable. As Jongin assesses the situation, he contemplates the possibility of having to confront all three of them simultaneously, despite his injured arms. His confidence, however, remains unshaken, for he believes that dealing with the other two should prove relatively easy compared to the platoon leader who lies unconscious after his powerful kick. He gazes intently at one of them, a sly grin curling upon his lips, his intention clear: to provoke the man into losing his composure. And, to no surprise, his ploy succeeds brilliantly. The targeted individual, his anger ignited, launches a series of furious attacks in his direction, yet each strike finds nothing but air as he deftly evades them with graceful, well-timed movements. In the midst of the chaotic brawl, he seizes the opportune moment, his keen eyes spotting a vulnerability, and lands a swift, calculated kick to the back of his opponent's knee. Pain etches across the man's face as he grimaces, temporarily immobilized. Not missing a beat, our protagonist, Jongin, follows up with a powerful upper kick aimed squarely at his adversary's chin, causing him to tumble to the ground. Defeated, a single decisive kick is all it takes to dispatch the remaining combatant, who crumples to the floor. The onlooking inmates are left utterly dumbfounded, their collective astonishment evident as they witness a solitary figure overpowering three opponents simultaneously. In the aftermath of his triumphant display of physical prowess, Jongin begins to regain his composure. A lingering sense of concern settles in as he contemplates the potential repercussions of his actions. His anxiety escalates when he envisions an employee stumbling upon the chaotic scene. Suddenly, Sunju, one of the fellow inmates, enthusiastically starts cheering his name, and a contagious wave of support ripples through the crowd as others join in. Jongin attempts to hush the enthusiastic spectators, but they prove resolute in their exuberance, rendering his efforts futile. His unease intensifies as he envisions the arrival of a welfare worker amidst the cheering. The prospect of heightened complexity gnaws at his nerves. As if foreseen, his worst fears manifest when an employee enters the scene, inquiring about the raucous disturbance. In an instant, the previously jubilant inmates fall eerily silent. The employee directs his attention toward the fallen platoon leader, brandishing a stern look and a sturdy stick. He points it menacingly toward Jongin, demanding to know if he is the instigator of this chaos. Jongin's mind races as he contemplates his options. Thoughts of subduing the worker briefly flit through his head: kick the stick away, headbutt the intruder, and deliver a swift kick to the abdomen. But rationality prevails. The prison's imposing barriers loom large in his mind, and the impending retaliation from the staff becomes a grim reality. Furthermore, the consequences of injuring a fellow staff member would be dire, making it nearly impossible to safeguard his own well-being. He acknowledges the sobering truth: escalation would only lead to more trouble. With a deep breath, Jongin opts for the path of least resistance. He humbles himself, bending down in front of the worker, and utters an apology, claiming that his actions were a regrettable mistake. In the midst of this tense moment, two brothers, Guang and another figure, make their presence known. Guang inquires pointedly if Jangan is the one responsible for the chaos that has unfolded. Jangan found himself caught in a complex web of circumstances, realizing that the current situation couldn't possibly get any more intricate. In the midst of this, Guang expressed his amazement at the solitary prowess of a man with injured arms, who had taken on 3 opponents without assistance. Guang admitted that initially, he had perceived this individual as a mere complainer, someone who couldn't stand up for himself and merely grumbled about the food. However, as he observed the events unfold, he began to see a different side to him, one that transcended these initial impressions. Intrigued by the unfolding drama, Guang inquired about what had been going through Jangan's mind during this remarkable feat. Subsequently, he challenged the audacity of Jangan's initial belief. With an air of authority, Guang imparted the fundamental rule that platoon members must always heed the directives of their leader, emphasizing that he himself had established this rule, and it was incumbent upon everyone to abide by it without exception. Jangan pondered whether this individual was truly determined to exert control over others' thoughts. Guang fixed a penetrating gaze on Jangan's visage, suggesting that he could still discern the inner workings of his mind behind those eyes, as if there were an unspoken narrative playing out. In a startling turn of events, Guang pronounced a 3-day stint in the punishment room as the consequence of Jangan's actions. Even Sunju, caught off guard by the severity of this punishment, couldn't help but react with shock. Jangan, however, viewed the prospect of spending 3 days in a cell-like punishment room with a degree of nonchalance. To this, Guang erupted into laughter, his amusement echoing off the walls as he cryptically hinted that Jangan's return would see him devoid of any inner musings behind those eyes. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. Are gang-related manhwas good in your opinion? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now back to the recap. In a final plea, Guang urged Jangan to engage in deep introspection during these 3 days of confinement. He patiently awaited a response, but Jangan maintained a resolute silence, his gaze locked into Guang's eyes. Sensing Jangan's unspoken resolve, Guang subtly communicated with his brother through a meaningful glance. Yom strode purposefully towards Jangan, his eyes narrowed with determination as he called out the man's name. But to his dismay, Jangan remained silent and unresponsive. Frustration welled up within Yom, and without further hesitation, he unleashed a swift, punishing punch squarely into Jangan's face, causing his nose to shatter, crimson droplets of blood immediately staining the scene. Breathing heavily, Yom leaned in closer, his voice filled with intensity as he demanded a response from Jangan. "Answer me, Guang." Jangan, with his nose still throbbing in pain, managed to stammer out a weak yes twice in quick succession. But Yom was not yet satisfied. He pressed on, delivering a merciless kick to Jangan's stomach, his voice resolute as he urged, "One more time, and make it loud." Jangan, despite the relentless physical and mental assault, summoned the strength to answer once more with a trembling but resolute yes. The relentless pressure from Yom pushed Jangan to the brink, but he knew he had to keep his composure. With another blow landing on his back, he was forced to speak louder and clearer, his words a testament to his determination to endure. Guang, the enforcer of this brutal scenario, was determined to make an example out of Jangan to deter any thoughts of rebellion from others. As they approached the punishment room, Jangan's thoughts raced with apprehension about what awaited him within those grim walls. Sunju, who had been watching the harrowing scene unfold, couldn't help but worry about his friend's fate. Catching Jangan's fleeting smile, Sunju wondered if he had been struck in the head one too many times to find solace in such a situation. As they continued their march towards the punishment room, Sunju couldn't help but ponder the strength of the general manager's fists. A subtle grin crossed his lips as he daydreamed about a future confrontation, convinced that his fists were no less formidable. However, their journey was abruptly interrupted by the welfare employee, who delivered a harsh blow to Jangan's head and barked at him to move faster. Undeterred, Jangan muttered under his breath, vowing to eventually settle the score with this cruel enforcer. Meanwhile, Yom redirected his anger towards the unconscious platoon leader, delivering a sharp and resounding slap across the man's face. The shock jolted the platoon leader awake, and he let out a pained scream, only to fall silent as he found himself face to face with Yom's unwavering gaze. With a tone of authority, Yom instructed the dazed platoon leader to accompany him, and with a nod to the other workers, ordered them to return to their tasks, reminding them that their break time had come to an end. Outside, Guang wasted no time in delivering a harsh assessment to the platoon leader, expressing his doubt about the man's suitability for a leadership role. He responds with unwavering determination, vehemently denying the allegations and asserting his potential as a leader. Guang, however, doesn't let up, and queries how he can make such a claim when he recently suffered a defeat at the hands of an opponent who couldn't even use their arms. In a tense moment, Guang seizes the opportunity to confront him further, gripping his insignia and inquiring how he can inspire confidence in his leadership when perceived as physically feeble. However, Guang is unyielding, prodding him further about his willingness to assert his superiority in a real, fair fight. He goes so far as to issue a direct challenge, urging him to strike right then and there. Panic washes over the platoon leader as he grapples with the daunting prospect of engaging in physical combat. Guang's persistence does not waver as he continues to emphasize the consequences of the platoon leader's humiliating knockout in front of his subordinates. To drive home the point, he reveals that he has already dispatched Jangan to endure a grueling 3-day stint in the punishment cell. The shock of this revelation rattles even him. With a sly smile, Guang hints at the forthcoming showdown, suggesting that it will occur when Jangan emerges from the punishment cell, mentally and physically drained, making him an easy target. Finally comprehending the purpose behind this cruel setup, the platoon leader is filled with a newfound resolve. Guang offers an encouraging pat on his shoulder and inquires if he is prepared to face this challenge head-on. The platoon leader, now resolute, firmly affirms his readiness. The stage is set as Jangan is escorted to a subterranean chamber, a colossal cell awaiting their fateful encounter. He enters the room, expecting to find solitary confinement as his punishment, but instead, he's greeted by a surprising sight, a series of small chambers. His curiosity piqued, he wonders why there aren't any isolated rooms in the basement as he had anticipated. His confusion intensifies when a man abruptly opens one of these chambers and gestures for him to enter. To his shock, he realizes that what he's been led into is not a room at all, but rather a cramped locker, barely large enough for a person to fit. He can't help but wonder if this is how they punish innocent individuals, locking them away in such a confined space. The employee's impatient voice pierces the air as he urges him to hurry, waving a threatening stick in his direction, as if to emphasize the consequences of disobedience. With great difficulty, he squeezes himself into the cramped locker. Standing straight is out of the question. He's forced to hunch over. As the door is sealed shut, darkness engulfs him. He can't help but draw parallels to his military training, where he had learned about various forms of torture employed by captors. One such torture method was chamber torture, where the victim couldn't sit or lie down, making sleep impossible in such an uncomfortable position. Eating, drinking, and even relieving oneself were luxuries denied to the unfortunate captive who had to endure this torment for extended periods. He ponders the use of such cruelty on ordinary people, perplexed by how it could be justified. Yet, his immediate concern is the daunting prospect of spending 3 long days in this unbearable confinement. This night marks his first in this dreadful torture chamber, but it's his 5th night in this welfare center overall. The 6th day begins as sunlight gradually seeps through, casting its beauty outside. Unbeknownst to him, a full day has passed since he was locked in that punishing cell. Completely cut off from the outside world, he has lost all sense of time and events occurring beyond his prison. He wonders if a day has already slipped away, his exhaustion making it impossible to differentiate between brief moments of rest and wakefulness. Above all else, a gnawing hunger consumes him. His tongue incessantly utters a single word: food. On the opposing side of the scenario, within the confines of the 3rd platoon hall, a distressing scene unfolds as Sunju finds himself at the mercy of the platoon leader's aggression. The atmosphere in the room is charged with fear and trepidation, as everyone present witnesses Sunju's torment. His cries of agony pierce the air, revealing the unfamiliarity of such brutality to him. The platoon leader, his voice thundering with anger, accuses Sunju of aligning himself with Jangan while he was unconscious. He cruelly taunts Sunju, asking him how he enjoys the repercussions of his alliance. Sunju, desperately attempting to utter a response, is silenced by a sharp kick to his leg from the platoon leader. Amidst this harrowing scene, Your Excellency intervenes, attempting to shame the others who had been involved in the rebellious scheme. However, a veil of feigned ignorance shrouds the faces of those present as they distance themselves from any knowledge of the unfolding events. The platoon leader's aggression escalates as he grabs Sunju by the hair, vowing to demonstrate the consequences faced by those who dare defy their leader. With brutal force, he strikes Sunju's face with his knee, hurling him to the unforgiving floor. The relentless onslaught continues as the platoon leader pummels Sunju with his foot. In the midst of this savage display, Your Excellency steps forward, appealing for an end to this brutality and questioning the platoon leader's motives. In response, the platoon leader directs his anger towards Your Excellency, delivering a kick that sends him tumbling onto Sunju. The platoon leader and his 2 loyal underlings persistently assault Sunju and Your Excellency, labeling them as traitors. They continue their relentless barrage, their kicks a symbol of their contempt. Meanwhile, in a completely different setting, Injai is engaged in a covert operation within the director's office, discreetly packing stacks of money into shoeboxes. This currency, concealed within the boxes, is intended as a bribe for government workers. Methodically, Injai assembles 3 bags, ensuring that the funds are indistinguishable from each other, poised to be distributed in an orderly fashion. Injoi's associate, Guang, extends an invitation to Yeom to accompany him on this mission. Yeom accepts, his curiosity piqued. Guang's gaze falls upon a conspicuously large box of money on the floor, prompting him to inquire about its purpose. His father, in a hushed tone, instructs him to leave that particular box untouched, as it is destined for someone of extraordinary significance. Puzzled by the substantial amount within this box, Yeom seeks an explanation from Injai. In response, Injai reveals that the recipient of this box is not just an ordinary government employee. He holds the key to the country's governance. Armed with this knowledge, Guang and Yeom set out to deliver these bribes to the government employees. During their journey, Yeom inquires about the nature of these individuals' assistance and the rewards they receive in return. Guang enlightens him, citing an example of a welfare department worker at Daesan City Hall who aids them in securing government funds. Guang offers the worker a gift bag, to which the worker expresses a desire to do more for their cause. Guang reassures him that his continued hard work is all that is required. Next, Guang embarks on a journey to the vibrant seaside of the city, where he has a rendezvous with the esteemed chief of the Daesan police station. As their meeting unfolds, the chief's discerning eye falls upon a shoebox, prompting him to remark appreciatively about the elegant and substantial nature of the footwear. In a gesture of deference, Guang nods his head respectfully and extols the virtues of the station's manager, who tirelessly crisscrosses the nation to serve its citizens. He encourages the chief to continue his noble mission while clad in these remarkable shoes. Guang's journey leads him to a chance encounter with an individual on a desolate road, to whom he imparts a thoughtful gift. This recipient happens to be the prosecutor representing the Daesan district, and he handles the offered bag with a measured touch, as though assessing its contents by weight. In response to Guang's coded message, the prosecutor reveals a penchant for apples, but is willing to accept pears this time around. Guang pledges to provide him with the finest apples when they come into season. As the prosecutor departs, Guang softly mutters that he need not be overly selective and should accept whatever is offered to him. He confides in Yeom, detailing how these individuals quash any attempts by whistleblowers to unveil the truth about the welfare center to the general public. Guang then extends a sum of money to Yeom, eliciting surprise from his companion. Yeom inquires if this money is a portion of the bribe funds, to which Guang responds by questioning how one can effectively bribe someone without offering something in return for their troubles. He reveals that he himself had discreetly accepted bribes in the past without arousing suspicion. This is why he has brought Yeom into this fold, emphasizing the importance of brothers sharing life's blessings. Grateful for Guang's support, Yeom expresses his heartfelt thanks. Subsequently, as they sit together in their car, Guang suggests a well-deserved treat for their commendable efforts. They make their way to a local restaurant and indulge in a delectable feast of cooked meat. Guang, a resourceful individual, crafted a humble yet delectable morsel by delicately placing a tender piece of meat alongside fragrant herbs onto a lattice leaf. With a sense of camaraderie, he extended his hands, offering this homemade creation to Yeom. He observed Yeom savor each bite with satisfaction and complimented his impeccable eating manners. These shared culinary moments were cherished by both of them. Amidst this pleasant interlude, Guang paused mid-bite as Yeom summoned his attention. Yeom inquired earnestly about Guang's intentions regarding a potential confrontation between the platoon leader and Zhanggan once he was released from confinement. Guang, intrigued by the question, sought to understand Yeom's perspective. He pondered whether an individual enduring 3 days in the punishment room could realistically triumph in such a duel. Yeom conceded that, under normal circumstances, victory would be an insurmountable challenge. Yet he recounted how Zhanggan had already bested 3 adversaries with broken arms, offering a glimmer of hope. Tentatively, Yeom ventured to express his belief that perhaps, Guang interjected, emphasizing the crucial perhaps. He probed Yeom's thoughts on whether Zhanggan's newfound strength would translate into utility for their cause. Yeom, though acknowledging this point, questioned how Guang intended to sway someone who could easily overpower their platoon leader. Guang conceded that immediate influence was improbable. However, he held firm in his belief that, through the ordeal of the punishment room, they could break Zhanggan's spirit and mold him into an obedient follower. 2 arduous days had elapsed since Zhanggan's confinement, during which sleep had eluded him entirely. His visage bore the weight of a century's worth of sorrow, resembling that of a lost soldier. Hunger gnawed at his insides, and his parched mouth conjured images of every conceivable dish. He clung to these culinary reveries as a lifeline, a reason to endure the relentless ordeal. But there was another, perhaps even more compelling motivation: Miss Siona. In the darkest moments of his confinement, Jongen's mind conjured the radiant and smiling countenance of Miss Siona. He recalled his promise to take her out for a meal, and this vision became his anchor. He visualized the scene where he would summon the courage to invite her to dinner, and in his imagination, she would gleefully accept. When she inquired about their meal choice, he would reply with heartfelt sincerity, declaring that the food mattered little as long as he had the privilege of her company. These thoughts were his whispered solace as he fought to endure. As another agonizing night descended upon this hellish place, the third day of Jongon's confinement came to a close. When the lock finally released its grip, he collapsed to the unforgiving floor, his body betraying his exhaustion. Struggling to lift his head, he met Guang's gaze, who wore a sardonic smirk, deeming Jongen's defeated countenance a sight to savor. Guang, the stern overseer, issues a commanding order for the others to relocate Jongen from his current spot. Jongen, lying weak and drained on the cold, unforgiving floor, is utterly incapable of movement due to his severe energy depletion. Over by the prison bars, Sunju and his distinguished companions stand watchfully. They swiftly approach Jongen, extending their helping hands to assist him in getting back on his unsteady feet. Sunju, his gaze filled with concern, remarks upon Jongen's visibly deteriorating condition. He urges that they expedite his transfer elsewhere for his own well-being. Together, they support Jongen as he struggles to walk, trailing behind Guang as they navigate the desolate surroundings. Jongen, casting a weary glance at Sunju's face, inquires about his well-being and the cause of the evident marks on his visage. Sunju proceeds to recount the unfortunate events of that day, explaining how he had suffered a thrashing from the platoon leader for taking his side. Furthermore, His Excellency had also faced retribution for daring to speak up in Sunju's defense. Despite the hardships endured, Sunju musters a faint smile when Jongen looks his way, evoking a sense of sympathy from his fellow inmate. With hunger gnawing at his stomach, Jongen queries Sunju about their destination, expressing his longing for sustenance. Sunju's response, however, dashes his hopes, revealing that their immediate priority is not to secure a meal. As their fellow inmates huddle together on the ground, an atmosphere of fear grips them all, contrasting with the platoon leader's composed demeanor, poised for an impending confrontation. Jongen, visibly weakened and distressed, takes note of his surroundings and concludes that his captors intend to force him into combat with the patio commander upon his release from the punishment chamber. The platoon leader, harboring vivid recollections of Guang's instructions from the past, recognizes the significance of this moment. He understands the necessity of preserving his reputation, especially after suffering a public humiliation when he was knocked down. Confident in his abilities, the platoon leader believes that he already holds the upper hand in this forthcoming battle. He anticipates that all he needs to do is defeat Jongon while feigning an air of nonchalance. Guang, on the other hand, derives amusement from the unfolding scenario, likening it to the spectacle of a gladiator duel. However, Yom, standing nearby, refrains from sharing in the laughter. Instead, he somberly observes Jongen's pitiable condition and remarks that, despite any pretense of a duel, the circumstances make it appear more like an execution. Nevertheless, he acknowledges the morbid curiosity that accompanies the impending spectacle. Guang, with an air of authority, issues the long-awaited command for the commencement of the impending battle. Both combatants find themselves thrust into the limelight, standing face to face, their fates hanging in the balance. The referee, a poised and impartial figure in the center, implores them to initiate the showdown upon his signal. Jongen, in the heat of the moment, contemplates the allure of a brief respite. His gaze drifts towards his platoon leader, who exchanges a meaningful glance with their comrades, conveying an unspoken message. Finally, the moment arrives as the referee brandishes the green flag, granting the signal for the epic confrontation to begin. In a calculated show of bravado, the platoon leader unleashes a thunderous, intimidating scream aimed squarely at Jongen. Yet, amid the raucous cheers and charged atmosphere, Jongen's mind drifts back to a clandestine meeting with his confidants the day before. In a hushed conversation, he had disclosed his intention to face Jongen the moment he emerged from confinement. Doubt lingers in his thoughts, for all too well, Jongen's reputation precedes him as the masterful wielder of his powerful legs. Still, the resolve to secure a victory in this looming duel remains paramount. A trusted friend had offered a clandestine strategy: exploit Jongen's vulnerability, his injured arms, by targeting them with a barrage of kicks as the battle began. While the platoon leader acknowledged the tactic's deceptive nature, he recognized its potential to secure a triumph. As the arena crackles with anticipation, he propels himself forward, letting out a primal scream that reverberates through the crowd. Meanwhile, Jongon remains stationary, seemingly resigned to the inevitable outcome. He hopes the confrontation will swiftly reach its conclusion, harboring no desire to fight back. But then, a realization seizes him. His vulnerable arms must be shielded at all costs. Consequently, when the platoon leader aims a precise kick at his weakened limbs, Jongen evades with a fluid, backward bend. The platoon leader's astonishment is palpable, his expectations shattered. In a swift, retaliatory twist, Jongen whirls around and launches a fierce back kick, landing it squarely in his opponent's abdomen. Agonizing screams rend the air, and the platoon leader's visage contorts in sheer pain, his face flushing crimson. Onlooker Yeom watches in amazement, left to ponder whether Jongen might possess an undisclosed mastery of martial arts. Gwang, momentarily forgetting himself, allows his jaw to hang agape as a chuckle, which had threatened to surface earlier, promptly dissipates. Streams of water gush from the platoon leader's eyes and mouth, a manifestation of both physical anguish and bewildering disbelief. The platoon leader's mind races with perplexing thoughts. Did Jongen truly emerge from the punitive confines just prior to this encounter? How could he wield such astonishing strength and agility? The enigma of Jongen's true abilities deepens with each passing moment. Jongen's gaze fixates upon the bruised countenances of Sunju and His Excellency, who had endured a merciless thrashing merely for expressing their support on that fateful day. The sight of their battered faces fuels an ever-mounting anger within him, kindling the ember of revenge in his heart. His eyes then turn towards the platoon leader, a man who seems to possess a premonition of the impending ordeal. With an unyielding determination, Jongen unleashes a forceful kick squarely to the platoon leader's visage, shattering his nose and initiating a profuse flow of crimson. The single devastating blow sends the platoon leader tumbling to the ground, leaving onlookers in stunned silence. Not a single eyelid dares to flutter, and the expressions etched upon every face bear witness to the profound shock that has enveloped them. Unbridled fury still coursing through his veins, Jongen relentlessly pummels his fallen adversary with successive kicks to the face. The platoon leader's comrades, once filled with terror, now gaze in horror at the gruesome spectacle unfolding before them. Amidst the chaos, Sunju's enthusiasm reignites, and he resumes his spirited cheers, while His Excellency, his faith unwavering, voices his enduring support. Meanwhile, the platoon leader appears to teeter on the brink of consciousness, foam oozing from his battered features. Drawing closer to Gwang, Jongen inquires if his insatiable thirst for satisfaction has been quenched. In response, Gwang, with a wry grin, acknowledges Jongen's peculiar sense of humor and expresses complete contentment. As Jongen begins to articulate his intentions, his eyes suddenly shut of their own accord, and he crumples to the ground, prompting the referee to rush to his side in concern. Gwang, perplexed and anxious, seeks answers about the sudden turn of events that have befallen his once boisterous comrade. The referee glanced at his peaceful visage and casually remarked, "He seems to be in the middle of a nap." Gwang, a sly grin stretching across his face, quipped, "This fellow is truly entertaining, and I've hatched an amusing plan for him." Jongen had been enjoying his serene slumber when, all of a sudden, he awoke to find himself under the watchful gaze of Sunju, who was brimming with anticipation at his revival. However, Jongen felt feeble and struggled to pry open his heavy eyelids. In a weak voice, he inquired, "What's happened?" Sunju responded nonchalantly, admitting that Jongen had dozed off, and he had personally transported him to this location, even taking the liberty of skipping work for the day to be by his side. Summoning his strength to sit up, Jongen noticed a peculiar ribbon and a set of keys dangling from his arm. Perplexed, he turned to Sunju and inquired about this new adornment. Sunju, with a smirk, divulged that, in Jongen's slumber, he had been anointed as the leader of the 3rd platoon by the vice president. Jongen's eyes darted skeptically towards Sunju, prompting him to ask if this was an elaborate jest. Meanwhile, Gwang and Yeom were nestled in the confines of their office. Yeom appeared somewhat troubled, his thoughts evidently preoccupied by a pressing matter. Gwang, ever the gracious host, prepared tea, meticulously adding a precise 2 spoons each of tea, sugar, and milk to his cup. As he handed the steaming beverage to Yeom, he cautioned, "Watch out, it's piping hot." Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out Dimitra Mohammed 174, who commented, "Make more best selection," on our Absorbing Monsters video. Thanks for commenting. Taking a sip, Yeom broached the topic that weighed on his mind. He queried, "What was your rationale behind appointing Jongen as the platoon leader?" Gwang, unperturbed by the question, retorted with a question of his own, asking if Yeom found fault in the tea's flavor. Yeom clarified that he was referring to Jongen's sudden promotion and the potential ramifications. Gwang explained, "The primary reason is that our previous leader proved to be weaker than I had anticipated, while Jongen, as it turns out, possesses a hidden strength we can harness when necessary." Yeom, however, delved deeper into his thoughts, suggesting that Jonggon was more than a mere brawler. He was a trained fighter. Guang, with curiosity piqued, inquired what Yeom was alluding to. Yeom articulated his concerns, fearing that if Jonggon's injuries fully healed, they might lose control over him. Guang, adopting a contemplative demeanor, responded that Yeom was ignorant of something crucial. Yeom, visibly intrigued, asked, "What don't I know?" Guang leaned in, his tone hushed, and revealed the company's policy. Only one of their employees could lead a platoon. He then encouraged Yeom to envision a scenario where 20 or 30 inmates attempted to overpower that lone employee. From a purely physical standpoint, it made perfect sense. However, within the confines of the prison, a peculiar phenomenon unfolds. Despite the simmering tensions and potential for violence, not a single inmate dares to step out of line and attack any of the prison employees. The question that perplexes many is why they hesitate to do so, especially when they possess the physical capability. Yeom, an observant inmate, believes there are two plausible explanations. Firstly, he posits that it's a case of inmates watching out for one another, a survival tactic in this harsh environment. They've learned that turning on their own kind only weakens their collective strength. Secondly, Yeom suggests that the fear of immediate retaliation plays a significant role. The inmates reckon that if they make a move, other employees can swiftly provide backup, leading to dire consequences. Even if an inmate were to muster the courage to challenge the authority, they understand that their rebellion would likely be short-lived. The formidable barricades and walls that encircle the facility serve as an impassable barrier. Any transgressor would be met with a harsh beating and confinement in the dreaded punishment room. However, Gwen believes there's a deeper psychological reason behind the inmates' reluctance to rebel. He points to the overwhelming fear and the sense of helplessness that tightly grip them, effectively keeping them in check. Gwen illustrates this with an analogy drawn from Southeast Asia, where young elephants are conditioned to fear humans through cruel methods. Despite growing into immensely powerful creatures capable of lethal force, these elephants never dare to harm a human. The deep-rooted fear remains. In Gwen's view, Jongin too has been conditioned in a similar manner, and his transformation requires a careful and considered approach. Yeom questions the necessity of making Jongin the platoon leader. Guang asserts that it's not just a choice, but a requirement. This role is seen as a way to gradually acclimate Jongin to his new surroundings. Over time, it's hoped he will come to accept the prison as his home, much like the other inmates. As the two inmates sit on the floor near Jongin's bed, they muster the courage to apologize for their past transgressions against him. Jongin, informed that the previous platoon leader was sent to the ward after a fight, listens to their pleas. However, he cannot find it within himself to forgive them. Their faces fall, and they inquire about the reasons for his reluctance. Jonggon calmly explains that he holds no grudges against them. He has not been in the prison long enough to bear any personal resentment. Their tension eases slightly upon hearing this revelation. Jongin, taking the role of a mentor, gestures to the inmates behind them and advises his two companions to seek forgiveness from their fellow inmates, who appear eager for retribution. Jongin lets out a yawn and suggests they settle their issues among themselves. He's going back to sleep. Those two keep pleading for help, but he turns away and dozes off. After waking up, he wonders if lying down like that ever brought him such joy. Then he gazes at the keys and armband and questions why they handed him these items. He recalls that they were about to make an example out of him when he left the punishment room. They wanted to salvage some reputation for that platoon leader after his last defeat. But then, he spoiled their plan by taking down that guy. And perhaps they tossed him in the ward because he was no longer of use after losing to that guy twice. He says he can grasp their plan up to this point, but why make him the platoon leader? Do they believe giving him this role will make him power-hungry like that guy? And in doing so, they can manipulate him? He smirks and remarks how amusing this is. Who do they think he is? He claims they haven't encountered anyone more intelligent than themselves, possibly because their surroundings are foolish, or they're unaware that others aren't as self-centered as they are. He decides to comply with their wishes for now, as it seems like the best course of action. At the Dizan Hotel, it's the grand opening of the casino and dining lounge. All the decorations are in place. Ti-moon and Choi are prepared to cut the ribbon. The announcer signals the ribbon-cutting ceremony, starts the countdown, and they cut the ribbon. The media captures the entire event. Choi shakes hands with Ti-moon, congratulates him on this momentous day, and says it was worth the wait. Ti-moon respectfully acknowledges Senator Choi's words, but privately criticizes him, thinking that if Choi hadn't vacillated between him and Guanho, he wouldn't have had to wait so long. The senator's secretary reminds him of his next appointment, and he departs, promising to meet again soon to discuss what couldn't be accomplished today. Ti-moon reciprocates the good wishes for the senator's trip. His secretary informs him that the senator has left, and he can relax now. Ti-moon worries, knowing the senator will call him for another meeting, and he instructs his secretary to prepare another box of apples for him. Then he invites everyone to go out for a meal. When asked where to eat, he suggests the same place with delicious dumplings. and he tells them they can order anything they desire as he's treating them. His hidden agenda is to gather all the food for himself, but Taemoon is genuinely enjoying the moment today. His secretary pours him a drink and commends him on a job well done. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps. In the restaurant, officials brought everything they had prepared to their table. The room buzzed with anticipation as they set out a feast fit for kings. The table overflowed with dishes, a colorful array of flavors and aromas that filled the air. The setting was opulent, with golden chandeliers casting a warm, inviting glow over the room. Elegant drapes adorned the large windows, billowing softly in the breeze. The plush velvet chairs welcomed guests, cradling them in comfort. Joe Taemoon sat at the head of the table. His sharp eyes surveyed the scene, and his heart swelled with pride. He felt the camaraderie in the room as colleagues and friends came to him, offering toasts and kind words. "Let's have a drink," they chorused, and Joe Taemoon, never one to refuse company, clinked glasses with all his employees. He turned to his trusted companion, and the younger man poured him a drink. "You've done an excellent job," the young man said, his voice full of admiration. Taemoon grinned and replied, "You've done well too, my friend." They continued to enjoy their drinks, their laughter filling the room as they discussed their future business prospects. Amidst the revelry, Taemoon, the man in a brown suit, caught his friend's attention. His face wore a melancholy expression that contrasted with the festive atmosphere. "Why the long face?" he asked, concerned for Joe Taemoon. "You've just started a new venture. You'll make a fortune from it." Taemoon sighed, his gaze distant. "Money's great, but something's been bothering me lately," he confessed. "When I first came to this city, I loved how everything followed rules. The strong climbed to the top, but now in business, I have to tolerate the weak. It doesn't sit right with me." The man nodded in understanding, for he too had wrestled with these business rules that demanded compromise. As the night wore on, the party began to wind down. Joe Taemoon bid farewell to everyone, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He climbed into his luxurious car, the leather seats embracing him in comfort. His personal driver was at the wheel. He watched the cityscape speed by, the glittering lights forming a tapestry of possibilities. He realized that there was a world outside this car, a life different from the one he led, a life that seemed to be passing him by. "Stop the car!" Joe Taemoon requested, his voice firm. "We're not home yet, sir," the driver replied, concern etched on his face. "I just need some fresh air," Joe Taemoon said, opening the car door. The road was not long, and Joe Taemoon strolled past nearby shops, the cool breeze clearing his head. As he approached his house, a voice called out, "Joe Taemoon!" He turned, perplexed, as someone shouted his name. He hadn't encountered anyone he knew today, as everyone had attended his business opening. When Joe Taemoon turned around, he found himself facing Park Gwanho, flanked by his burly guards and that same thug he had once taken pride in. It seemed like Park Gwanho had something on his mind, probably about the business venture they were supposed to open today. He gave an apology for his tardiness, a rare sign of humility from the usually arrogant gang leader. Just kidding. He's looking for a fight. Joe Taemoon couldn't help but wonder why Park's ranks had thinned so drastically. The recent restaurant massacre had left many of his men hospitalized, but there was something more to it that he couldn't quite grasp. Park Gwanho was visibly seething with anger, and it was clear that he intended to take control of the situation. The young man, dressed in a brown suit, stepped forward with a cocky grin. He challenged Park Gwanho, taunting him with words that stung like a bee's sting. He questioned whether they understood the rules of engagement, and Joe Taemoon could see the sparks of tension in the air. The audacity of this young upstart to challenge their boss left the gang offended. Suddenly, a frenzied crowd of gang members surged forward, responding to their boss's command. They were like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. Park Gwanho was determined to teach this insolent young man a lesson, not only for the incident at the restaurant, but also for taking away his business opportunity. The young man, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the impending onslaught. In his head, a sense of clarity emerged amidst the chaos. He initially thought it was the crisp evening air that sharpened his senses, but he soon realized it was the high-stress situation that had him on edge. With swift determination, he dashed toward the oncoming guards, who approached like an approaching storm. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. What would you do in prison? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now, back to the recap. The guards, armed with batons and other makeshift weapons, prepared to subdue the daring intruder. The most aggressive among them swung his baton with all his might, aiming to strike the young man down. However, they underestimated their opponent, unaware of his background in a special unit which had honed his combat skills. The young man dodged the incoming attack, gracefully weaving through the chaos. He retaliated swiftly, targeting the head of one of the bandits. His strikes were precise, each blow landing with expert precision. Blood sprayed as the bandit staggered, his broken nose a testament to the young man's skill. Despite the outnumbered odds, the young man held his ground, refusing to yield to the relentless onslaught. He showed no restraint, determined to defend himself and prove his mettle. The bandits, initially confident, now found themselves overwhelmed by this arrogant but capable adversary. As the dust settled, half of the bandits lay defeated on the ground, nursing their wounds and regrets, while the others continued their futile resistance. Joe Tae-moon's audacity and prowess were great as he held his own against insurmountable odds. Arrogant or not, this newcomer had certainly earned some respect from the readers that day. When the young man looked around, he saw that half of the bandits had already vanished into thin air. It wasn't bad news for him. He understood that this meant the massacre would soon come to an end. He took a moment to breathe in the scene around him. The young man in the suit didn't quite comprehend who the one wielding the stick with the most ferocity was. This aggressor lunged at him, attempting to knock him down. However, Joe Tae-moon stood his ground and evaded the blow. He moved like a rat, sneaking behind the attacker and swinging his stick to strike Joe's head from behind. But Joe Tae-moon's reflexes were lightning fast. He swiftly reacted to the impending blow, delivering a counterattack with precision. The assailant crashed to the ground, dazed and disoriented. Joe Tae-moon, his heart racing, warned the fallen thug, "You should never start a fight if you're not confident in your abilities or lack the skill." In the next moment, a menacing thug, one of Park Gwon-ho's guards, grabbed Joe Tae-moon by the throat. The young man's face turned crimson as he struggled to draw a breath. Park Gwon-ho, the formidable leader, ordered his guard to continue the punishment, expressing a gruesome desire to witness the organs of this impudent fellow spill out. The thug raised Joe Tae-moon high above his head, still clutching his throat as if he were about to crush him. He demanded that Joe speak or remain silent forever. Joe Tae-moon, gasping for air, began to emit weak and incomprehensible sounds. The thug taunted, suggesting that these might be Joe's last words. However, Joe Tae-moon was not ready to give up. He contemplated his options, realizing that if he couldn't strike the thug with his hands, he could resort to a more unconventional tactic. He decided to give a powerful kick, aiming squarely between the thug's legs. The impact was devastating. The thug doubled over in excruciating pain, letting out a wild scream as he released his grip on Joe's throat. The other bandits, who had been observing the altercation, winced in unison. This thug had now suffered a beating for the second time, rendering him incapacitated. Joe Tae-moon took only a moment to explain to the injured thug that he couldn't speak if he was holding someone by the throat, his anger uncontainable. He struck the thug repeatedly. The bandits who had been standing nearby scattered in all directions. The remaining bandits were left in disbelief, unsure of how to proceed. If this thug couldn't handle Joe Tae-moon, how could they? Fear coursed through their veins. The young man in the suit took a deep breath, realizing that he was just getting started after a satisfying meal and a refreshing drink. This encounter had become an unexpected adventure, and he relished the thrill of it all. He came closer to Park Gwon-ho and the remaining bandits, a determined look in his eyes as he approached. Joe Tae-moon, dressed in a sharp suit, had a confident air about him. He pointed at them with his finger, signaling that it was time to step up the game. He had already warmed up, and now he was ready for a real fight. Park Gwon-ho, the man in charge of the bandits, recognized that it was time to end this bloodshed. He gestured for Joe Tae-moon to come closer, indicating that he was willing to talk. Deep down, he believed that maybe talking was the way to resolve their issues. The young man in the brown suit agreed, nodding his head in agreement. He had nothing against having a conversation. The position of power remained with Joe Tae-moon. Park had come here seeking revenge on the young man. He had taken away his business and opened his own, which meant that now only the young man in the brown suit would profit from it. Park Gwon-ho reassured the young man, telling him that there was no need to dwell on the past. He had come for something entirely different, a matter of great importance. Park began his inquiry, not entirely clear in his questioning. He wanted to know if the person who had attacked the restaurant was associated with the young man. He continued, hoping to prevent any lies. The business was now firmly in the young man's hands. The young man scratched the back of his head, acknowledging that the person who had attacked the restaurant indeed belonged to his gang. He then asked Park why he was searching for him. He was well aware that Jay Park sought revenge, but he had no intention of divulging any information. They had an unspoken agreement. He would only spill the beans if they managed to defeat him. Park pleaded for just one piece of information. Where could they find the guy they were looking for? He had scoured the city, but the person in question seemed to have vanished. The young man replied as he walked away, admitting that he didn't know. He had last seen him on the day of the attack, and since then, he had no idea where the guy had disappeared to. To make matters worse, both of the attacker's arms were in casts. The young man wiped sweat from his brow, realizing that he was perspiring profusely. His shirt clung to his body, and his once immaculate suit was now wrinkled and damp under his armpits. Despite the pressure, he found a strange thrill in this unexpected adventure. Meanwhile, Park Gwan-ho gathered all his guards in his office, a formidable group led by a tough-looking individual. They sat in silence, contemplating the lessons they had just learned, the consequences of their actions. It was clear that his guards had failed to carry out his orders as they should have. The tough leader turned to Park and humbly asked for forgiveness, to which Park simply responded that he hadn't expected much from them in the first place. They had just left the hospital, unsure if they could ever defeat him on an ordinary day. The door swung open abruptly and a voice called out, "Park Gwan-ho!" Everyone sitting in the room turned their heads, curiosity etched on their faces. They couldn't help but wonder what else could go wrong today. A disheveled man with missing teeth stood at the door, clad in a military uniform, and he seemed in a perpetual state of agitation. He was shouting incessantly, and his nervousness was palpable. Something had clearly rattled him deeply, and he hadn't expected such a turn of events during his military training back in the city. The man at the door, now flustered and desperate, began to apologize profusely, directing his remorse toward the gentleman in the room. However, the gentleman reassured him, saying that there was no need for apologies as it wasn't his fault. In hushed tones, Park confided that all of this chaos was orchestrated by Joe Tae-moon's cunning schemes. He urged the gentleman not to take matters into his own hands. The gentleman, though, had an entirely different agenda on his mind. He inquired if the military had any information about the hospital where the young man in the brown jacket had been taken. The gentleman not only knew which hospital Cho Tae-moon's associates frequented, but he also realized that it was imperative to investigate. The guy who had humiliated them now had broken arms and was likely receiving treatment in that very clinic. His loyal associate was dispatched to gather more information, leaving the toothless military man perplexed by this unexpected turn of events. He couldn't fathom why they hadn't chosen to exact immediate revenge upon the one who had dealt such a blow to their master's pride. The physical injuries were secondary. It was the hurt to their master's ego that truly stung. This relentless warrior was on a mission to avenge that affront. The following day, the toothless warrior stealthily infiltrated the clinic, determined to unearth every detail about this mysterious adversary. He needed to uncover the man's identity and his place of residence. Making an appointment with a doctor, he entered the office where the physician casually inquired about his ailment. Treating him like any other patient, the doctor repeated the question, "Where does it hurt?" The toothless man, now donned in civilian attire, responded with an ominous air, "It's my soul that hurts, doctor. Someone has gravely offended my master." In a swift, unexpected move, he grabbed the doctor's head and pressed it firmly onto the table, his intention clear, to extract every bit of information possible. Scattered on the table in various directions were a pen and pencil, along with someone's medical history, freshly written by the doctor after seeing the patient. The doctor replied, "This young man's name is Do Jagan, and he indeed had an appointment with me. Do Jagan had 2 broken arms, and the doctor had just put him in a cast. This was already something, as now this toothless man, whose name was Sangshil, knew the name of his master's offender. Sangshil demanded that the doctor tell him Do Jagan's phone number or address. The doctor hesitated, explaining that clients from Mr. Joe's circle did not share such information. Of course, this was not entirely satisfactory for Sangshil, but he decided that having a name was enough to begin his search. He reported this news by calling his master on the phone, though he wasn't entirely pleased because it was a very small lead. One name did provide a starting point. Sangshil needed to go elsewhere, and the restaurant where Jo Tae-moon's people frequented was the next destination. Park Gwan-ho's people had discovered where Do Jongan and Jo Tan had last been seen together. It was one of Jo Tae-moon's most visited places, so Sangshil went there. As he entered the establishment, he asked the waiter to bring him a dish with ju and udon. When the waiter brought the already prepared dish to his table, Sangshil, with his toothless voice, asked if a guy with 2 broken arms had recently visited. Without hesitation, the waiter recalled the customer. Sangshil offered him some money for sharing information about this guy. Not all the waiters were squeaky clean, and for a fee they were willing to share what they knew. The waiter began to talk about how the guy had gotten drunk and then stumbled home. It seemed like he had intended to catch a bus, but he clearly wasn't a local. Unfortunately, at that hour, the buses were no longer running, and the waiter didn't have more details. While the waiter was sharing everything he knew about the man with Sangkyol, the occupants of the nearby table called out his name. They shouted, "Sangkyol!" It was apparent they knew him well, but judging by their stern expressions, they didn't welcome his presence. One of the men from the neighboring table asked, "Who brought you to this restaurant?" These were Jo Tae-moon's people, and Sangshil was clearly not welcome here. Sangshil motioned for the waiter to leave and told him they would talk later. Now he had to figure out how to deal with these unwelcome adversaries. He had clearly entered their territory, and he had no choice but to admit that he came here to find out if the local hoop was as delicious as they claimed it to be. The men, after enduring his nonsensical explanation, firmly stated that this place was their office, which meant it was their territory. He had no right to enter without their permission. He continued to make feeble excuses, insisting he hadn't come to their office to enjoy a plate of hoop. The man, growing increasingly frustrated, reminded him that while he was away, their office had already been disrupted. There was a hint of pride in the man's voice as he seemed to relish the idea of humiliating someone who appeared toothless both literally and figuratively. He didn't care to hear the man's entire explanation. In a fit of anger, he flung the contents of his plate at the man's face. Toothless immediately stood up, clutching a bottle in his hand, ready to defend himself. He knew he was up against 3 opponents, and he had initiated this showdown by tossing food at one of them. Raising the bottle over his adversary's head, he understood that he had to strike first, otherwise they would pounce on him instantly. Toothless wasn't one to back down from a fight. The bottle struck the man on the head, and shards flew in all directions, signaling the impending brawl. Nobody intended to let him leave unscathed. 2 other men had approached, observing the unfolding chaos. It hurt them to witness this disturbance in their territory, but they were curious about his strength. Toothless stood there, grinning victoriously, taunting the other 2. He proposed that if they desired it, he could treat them to the same treatment, all at his own expense. He threatened to throw another plate of food in their faces and smash a bottle of soju over their heads. The tension escalated as someone's foot crushed a shard of broken glass. Another young man joined the trio, likely from Joe Taemoon's group. They all regarded Toothless as an unwelcome guest in this restaurant, signaling with their body language that he needed to leave immediately. The man who had been struck with the bottle began to awaken, clutching his throbbing head and moaning loudly, setting the stage for what promised to be an intense confrontation. He was completely defenseless and needed medical help, and Toothless did not agree that they should escort him out of this establishment so hastily. He hadn't yet gathered all the information he needed from the waiter. This was his only chance to find out everything about this mysterious man. Therefore, Toothless decided not only to tend to the unconscious man, but also to deal with the other 2 individuals involved. The aroma of sizzling noodles and savory broth wafted through the air, mixing with the tension in the room. One of the remaining men, observing the events unfold, couldn't fathom how a stranger had infiltrated his establishment and caused such a ruckus. He too was ready to expel this intruder from his restaurant, but he knew there was more to this situation. He needed to understand why this man, Toothless, had come here with such ill intentions. The man took a few minutes to assess the situation fully. He didn't know the stranger's motives, but he was certain that Toothless harbored malevolent intentions. Determined to protect this establishment and his people, the man decided to act proactively. While Toothless was occupied with the other patrons, the man seized the opportunity to strike. He knew that disabling Toothless was crucial to restoring order. Toothless was no amateur. He had served in the army and received rigorous training. He reacted swiftly, narrowly avoiding the suited man's blow and delivering a powerful counterstrike that sent him staggering. Meanwhile, the 2 others quickly rushed to the suited man's aid and began ushering him toward the exit. The atmosphere in the restaurant remained tense, with patrons murmuring and exchanging worried glances. Toothless, undisturbed by the commotion, calmly resumed his meal. He had come here with a dual purpose: to eat and to extract information. He beckoned the waiter over and insisted that he continue with what he had started earlier, demanding answers without interruption. The waiter, realizing the gravity of the situation and having already received his payment, nodded obediently. He explained that the buses had stopped running and the man had chosen to embark on a slow, alcohol-fueled journey. Lost in the labyrinthine streets, he had eventually collapsed on a quiet alley, seeking respite in slumber. Perhaps the following day, he had managed to board a bus and leave the city, unbeknownst to anyone. As the tense atmosphere gradually dissipated in the restaurant, Toothless knew that he was dealing with a complex web of mysteries. The man Toothless was looking for had left the city long before anyone could apprehend him, leaving them with unanswered questions that lingered like an enigmatic fog in the air. Toothless thought that he was already weary of this work, and he longed for peace of mind. Why did he have to search for someone every time? The waiter paused, considering Toothless's question thoughtfully. Well, he began cautiously. Given the recent activity in the city's homeless assistance center, they've been actively rounding up not only the homeless, but also those who wander the streets at night under the influence. A furrow formed on Toothless's brow as he absorbed this unexpected piece of information. It was a puzzle piece he hadn't anticipated. So, you're suggesting there's a chance they might have taken him in off the streets? He pondered aloud. The waiter nodded, his eyes filled with empathy. That's certainly a possibility, he affirmed. There have been whispers that even ordinary individuals might find themselves there if they're found wandering the streets late at night. Toothless's mind raced with a whirlwind of thoughts and theories, each one offering a potential lead in his relentless pursuit. He knew there was no other recourse but to investigate this lead himself. The social institution loomed as his sole destination, beckoning him into the unknown. Meanwhile, at the prison, the routine breakfast ritual unfolded just like any other day. Each prisoner was presented with a meager selection of food, portions so diminutive that they were almost inedible. Dujagong, the commander of the third group, received his unappetizing meal and sat at the table, attempting to force down the tasteless morsels. It was a daily struggle, but he understood the importance of consuming at least something to stave off the gnawing hunger. Dujagon's authority within the prison was undisputed, and every eye in the room closely monitored his actions. The other prisoners often emulated whatever he did, especially when it came to matters as basic as eating. So, if he managed to ingest some of the unpalatable food, the rest would begrudgingly follow suit. However, one of his fellow inmates, the individual who had assisted him from the outset, noticed that something seemed to be bothering Dujagon. He leaned in and inquired about the cause of his concern. Dujagon confided that he was genuinely worried that his injured hands would not heal properly if he continued to subsist on this dismal sustenance. Just as the conversation took this turn, a portly man who fancied himself the prison president chimed in. He claimed to possess knowledge of a special medicine that could expedite the healing of Dujagong's hands. Dujagon was taken aback by this unexpected offer, unable to believe his ears. He contemplated the possibility that such a remedy could exist within the confines of this grim institution. However, his helpful companion leaned in, whispering a word of caution, suggesting that it might be prudent to decline the president's offer. After all, the man was known for concocting far-fetched tales and fanciful claims. It was entirely possible that he had concocted another one, this time regarding a miraculous medicine. Just as the skepticism began to settle in, the dining room's heavy door swung open, and a boisterous greeting echoed through the room. Dujagong turned his head toward the entrance, eager to see who had joined them for breakfast on this particular day. Two vice presidents entered the dining room, a customary occurrence in the prison. As usual, the elder brother led the way, while the younger sibling exuded an air of toughness. The regular visits to the dining room often involved scrutinizing the prisoners, and today, their focus was on Dujagong. The vice president wanted to gauge whether his plan had borne fruit. The decision to appoint this young man as the commander of the 3rd platoon, had it caused any shift in his attitudes, or had he remained the same? Walking past the table where Dujagong was seated, the vice president casually remarked, "Isn't this our new commander of the 3rd platoon?" It was apparent that he said it deliberately to elicit a reaction from Dujagong. In response, Dujagong rose from his seat and greeted the two vice presidents politely, adhering to his well-thought-out plan. The vice president inquired about Dujagong's impressions of the prison food, likely aware of the young man's dissatisfaction during their first encounter. Back then, his criticism had earned him a harsh reprimand from the former platoon commander. Dujagong paused briefly, reflecting on the consequences of his words. He recognized that he needed to be cautious and patient if he had any hope of escaping this place. Healing his injured hands was crucial. Taking a deep breath, Dujagong chose his words carefully. He conveyed his gratitude, attributing the opportunity to savor the delicious food to the two vice presidents. The vice president was visibly pleased with this response, hearing precisely what he had hoped for. He commended Dujagong and advised him to continue in the same manner in the future. The other prisoners stood by, waiting for permission to sit down. They knew that they couldn't afford to speak their minds about the unappetizing food. They were bound by the rules set by this very vice president. A fellow inmate who had assisted Dujagong earlier praised him for handling the situation admirably and not inciting further conflict. They all understood the importance of biding their time. As the president left the dining room, he remarked to his brother that people tend to adapt to their circumstances, whether they want to or not. It was a reminder that, within the confines of the prison, survival often depended on playing the game and making the right moves, no matter how distasteful they may be. The bruiser vice president exchanged a thoughtful glance with his brother, pondering whether the newcomer had truly capitulated so readily. He found Dujagong's acquiescence to be rather peculiar. Meanwhile, the self-proclaimed president, the portly man, persisted in his questioning of Dujagong. He probed whether Dujagong genuinely desired to acquire the needed medicine. Dujagong affirmed his interest, but emphasized the necessity of consuming sustenance first, explaining that one needed to eat well before taking any medication. The bully vice president appeared obtuse, but Dujagong's behavior gave him pause, stirring a hint of doubt about the young man's willingness to change. Despite his elder brother's satisfaction, he continued to assert that even someone as seemingly unyielding as Dujagong could become a puppet in his hands. As dusk descended outside, and the courtyard of the social institution grew devoid of prisoners who had already retired to their barracks after a day's labor, Dujagong and the inquisitive companion ventured into the depths of the yard. There, the man began to dig into the ground, a curious undertaking that piqued the young man's interest. He couldn't resist asking Dujagan about the promised medicine, as the commander seemed engrossed in his digging. Dujagan explained that he engaged in this unusual pastime simply because he had some spare time after lunch and decided to amuse himself in this manner. It reminded him of moments in the army when his squad members indulged in various trivial activities during their free time. A reminder that they were still human, capable of laughter and joy even in dire circumstances. Maintaining their humanity was crucial for survival in such harsh places as the social center for homeless assistance. If one lived solely by the rules without experiencing other emotions, the risk of losing one's sanity was ever present. Suddenly, Dujagan's companion shouted in astonishment. He had discovered something in the ground. Dujagan and the young man were taken aback, wondering if it was a secret stash of medicine. The rotund president proudly declared that this was indeed the elusive medicine he had mentioned earlier, extending both hands toward Dujagan. The contents of his hands left the young men in shock and disbelief. Dujagan stared at his cupped palms, utterly perplexed by the offering before him. He couldn't fathom how this could possibly be medicine or why it was being presented to him. His Excellency, however, persisted in his unusual assertion that these were newly born rat cubs. They were minuscule, fitting easily into his hands. The rotund man went on to explain that these newborn rodents, unlike their mother, had soft flesh and bones, making them suitable for consumption. The young man was baffled and repulsed by the idea of eating these living beings. They may have been a source of calcium and protein, as His Excellency claimed, but the ethical dilemma weighed heavily on him. The man next to Jagan clutched his head, urging him to reconsider, insisting that this proposal had gone too far. He implored him to leave the matter be. His Excellency's knowledge of such practices in Vietnam, or possibly a correctional camp in Saman, didn't make the situation any less bewildering. He could have picked up this knowledge while wandering the streets, his sanity long lost. The young man repeatedly suggested they put an end to this bizarre spectacle and leave, but something kept him rooted in place, deep in contemplation. After several minutes of tense silence, Dujagan acquiesced, acknowledging the truth in His Excellency's words. The companion was astonished, thinking Dujagan had finally relented, but it turned out that he agreed for an entirely unexpected reason. He believed he needed the nutrients these newborn rats possessed to expedite the healing of his hands. The revelation left the companion shocked, and Dujagan poised to take action. Without fully comprehending the implications, Dujagan picked up one of the newborn rats and, driven by his desperation to recover, began to place them in his mouth, one by one. He chewed them quickly and swallowed, the whole situation resembling a chilling thriller. In these moments, he disconnected from his consciousness, driven solely by the primal instinct to survive. The companion, meanwhile, averted his gaze and covered his mouth with both palms, unable to witness the disturbing scene that unfolded before him. The sight induced a powerful gag reflex, and he struggled to come to terms with the length to which they were willing to go for the sake of survival in this grim environment. In his eyes, the young man had just consumed a living creature to survive in such a dire environment. It's essential to remember that each person here is just an ordinary individual with the right to life. However, in order to escape from such a dreadful place, one often needs to adopt a merciless mindset. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out at Abhilashmir 7367, who commented, "Absorption," on our Omniscient Reader video. Thanks for commenting. For the security guard, his job was routine. Every morning he arrived at work, and in the evening he departed as his shift ended. The guards worked in shifts, relieving each other day in and day out. In return for their service, they received a decent salary. As the shift change was underway, one of the guards prepared to head home. His fellow guards inquired whether he was leaving work, because they were the ones on duty today, staying overnight. One of the guards who would remain on duty playfully shouted to the departing one, questioning the rush. After all, he didn't have a wife, and no one was eagerly awaiting him at home. So what was the hurry? The departing guard seemed in a rush to leave, quickly donning his attire and informing everyone before he slammed the door shut. Indeed, he didn't have a wife, and no one was expecting him at home. But there was something that tugged at him more strongly than the thought of his wife's face, an irresistible urge that pulled him away from work. He never went straight home. Instead, he headed to a place where he indulged in card games daily. To him, it was a much-needed escape, a way to find solace and distraction. In this establishment, he experienced the thrill and despair of gambling. He often lost all his money, though occasionally they allowed him to win a small sum before reclaiming it. He wasn't the most skillful player, but the game had a way of consuming him entirely. As the cards were dealt, he counted his points, 9 this time. He allowed himself to believe that today might be different, that he'd finally strike it big. He began to mentally celebrate his impending victory. Yet, as always, the outcome remained consistent. He lost everything. He consoled himself, vowing that next time he'd surely have better luck. He even contemplated taking out a gaming loan to continue playing. Gaming loans were illegal, offered by private individuals in gaming houses. Every time he lost, he reassured himself, claiming that it was okay and that he would surely recoup his losses the next time around. Today, as he took out a gaming loan, he was resolute that fortune would finally favor him. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.